Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars through the massive viewing window. The ship moved slowly through space in the outer rim territories that humans now called home. It had been 50 years since humanity left the Galactic Federation, and Jake still remembered the stories his grandfather told him about those dark days. The exploration vessel was conducting routine surveys of nearby star systems. Jake walked between the control stations where his crew worked quietly. Lieutenant Amy Foster monitored communications from her station while Commander Pete Davis checked the navigation systems. Dr. Helen Cruz was in the science lab, below, studying samples from the last planet they visited. Jake thought about how different things were now compared to the old Federation days. Back then, humans lived scattered across Federation space on worlds controlled by alien governments. They worked in Federation cities and served on mixed crews with dozens of different species. His grandfather had been one of those humans who believed the Federation was a partnership between equals. The truth had been much darker. Dr. Lisa Parker had discovered the real situation by accident while working as a xenobiologist on the Federation capital world of Zentara Prime. She was researching genetic compatibility between species when she gained access to classified government archives. What she found changed everything for humanity. Every major breakthrough in Federation history had come from human minds. The faster than light drive that connected the galaxy was invented by a human engineer named Robert Kim in 2387. The terraforming technology that made hostile worlds livable was developed by human scientists working in Federation labs. The medical advances that saved billions of lives across dozens of species all originated from human research teams. Even the military strategies that kept Federation space safe from raiders and hostile aliens were created by human tactical officers. The other species in the Federation had contributed almost nothing to their shared civilization, except administrative oversight and political control. Lisa Parker spent months gathering evidence from the archives. She found correspondence between alien leaders discussing how to manage their human problem solvers. The documents showed that Federation species had deliberately kept humans scattered across their territory to prevent them from communicating with each other about their discoveries and innovations. The worst part was learning that alien species had stopped trying to innovate themselves. They had grown so dependent on human creativity that their own scientists and engineers had become little more than technicians who maintained human-designed systems. Generation after generation of aliens had been raised believing that humans were naturally gifted problem solvers, while other species were better suited for leadership and organization. When Lisa brought her evidence to Admiral Ryan Brooks, he initially refused to believe it. Ryan had served the Federation military for 30 years and considered himself a loyal citizen. But as he reviewed document after document, the horrible truth became clear. Humanity was not a partner in the Federation, but rather a resource to be managed and exploited. Ryan called together every human in positions of authority throughout Federation space. They met secretly on a mining station in the Kepler system, where humans made up most of the workforce. Scientists, military officers, engineers, doctors, and colonial administrators came from across the galaxy to hear Lisa's evidence. The reaction was immediate and unanimous. Humanity would demand recognition for their contributions and equal representation in Federation leadership. If the aliens refused, then humans would consider other options, including withdrawal from the Federation entirely. Admiral Brooks led a delegation to the Federation Council on Zentara Prime. He presented a formal document listing human contributions to galactic civilization and demanding immediate changes to Federation structure. The humans wanted equal voting rights, the right to establish their own colonies, and acknowledgement of their role in creating Federation technology. The alien representatives listened politely, then dismissed every human demand. The Alterian ambassador claimed that all Federation advances were collaborative efforts and that humans were exaggerating their contributions. The Zephyrian delegate insisted that Federation structure was based on each species contributing their natural strengths, and that humans should be grateful for alien guidance. Most insulting was the Corlin military commander, who suggested that human demands were motivated by jealousy. and that humanity should focus on what they did best, which was solving technical problems rather than political leadership. Ryan Brooks stood before the assembled alien leaders and delivered humanity's response. If the Federation would not recognize human contributions and provide equal representation, then humanity would withdraw from Federation space entirely. The aliens had exactly 1 year to accept human terms or face the consequences. The Federation Council voted unanimously to reject human demands. They seemed to believe that humans were bluffing or that a few dissatisfied individuals could not speak for their entire species. The aliens had grown so accustomed to human compliance that they could not imagine organized resistance. They were wrong. The human exodus began exactly 1 year later and was the most coordinated operation in galactic history. Every human colony requested immediate independence from their alien administrators. Human crews on Federation ships resigned their positions and departed for designated rally points. Scientists and engineers working on critical Federation projects simply stopped showing up for work. The withdrawal took less than 6 months. Humans had secretly been planning and preparing for over a year using communication networks the aliens never knew existed. Ships appeared at human settlements across the galaxy to evacuate anyone who wanted to leave. Even humans who had lived their entire lives on alien worlds chose to join the exodus rather than remain under Federation rule. Jake's grandfather had been part of the evacuation fleet. He told stories about the massive convoys of human ships moving through Federation space while alien governments frantically tried to negotiate. Some species offer better working conditions or higher pay to convince humans to stay. Others threatened military action to prevent the exodus. None of it worked. By the end of 2441, virtually every human had left Federation space for the Outer Rim territories beyond alien control. They established new colonies on unclaimed worlds and built their own civilization from scratch. Jake was brought back to the present when Lieutenant Foster called from her station. She had detected an encrypted transmission from deep space using an old Federation communication protocol. The message was fragmented but seemed to be coming from the direction of former Federation territory. As Amy worked to decode the signal, Jake wondered what news it might bring from the civilization humanity had left behind 50 years ago. Reports from the early years after the Exodus suggested the Federation was struggling without human innovation, but contact had been minimal since then. The decoded message finally appeared on the main screen, and Jake read it with growing concern. If the transmission was accurate, then humanity's departure had caused problems far worse than anyone had imagined. 3 months had passed since Lieutenant Amy Foster first detected the mysterious transmission from Federation space. The New Horizon had continued its survey mission, but Jake Morrison found himself thinking about that fragmented message more often than he cared to admit. The words had been incomplete, but the emergency beacon signature was unmistakable. Amy had been working on the communication problem during her off-duty hours. She set up additional monitoring equipment to scan frequencies that had once carried Federation traffic. Most channels remained silent, but occasionally weak signals would reach their position in the Outer Rim territories. Jake was reviewing planetary survey data when Amy called him to the communications station. Her console was displaying multiple incoming transmissions, all using old Federation distress protocols. The signals were weak and broken, but there were dozens of them coming from different directions. Across former Federation space. Amy activated the main speakers and the bridge, filled with fragments of alien voices speaking in languages Jake recognized from his academy training. The Zephyrian agricultural coordinator was requesting immediate assistance with crop failures on 7 different worlds. A Corlin military commander was reporting massive defeats against pirate raiders who had never been a serious threat during Federation times. The most disturbing transmission came from an Alterian science station near the galactic core. The station chief was describing the complete breakdown of their terraforming systems on newly settled worlds. Atmospheric processors were failing, and the Alterian engineers could not determine why. Thousands of colonists were in danger as their artificial environments collapsed. Commander Pete Davis joined Jake and Amy at the communications station. Pete had served in the Federation military before the Exodus and knew the aliens well. He listened to the distress calls with a grim expression on his weathered face. Pete explained what Jake was hearing. The Zephyrians had been the Federation's primary food producers, but their agricultural systems were all based on human genetic modifications and farming techniques, without human scientists to adapt crops to changing planetary conditions. The alien farmers were helpless when diseases or climate shifts threatened their harvest. The Corlin Defense Fleet had been the military backbone of the Federation for centuries. Their ships and weapons were advanced, but their tactical doctrines had been created entirely by human strategic planners. Corlin officers were trained to follow predetermined battle plans, but they could not adapt when faced with new threats or unexpected enemy tactics. Dr. Helen Cruz arrived on the bridge after hearing about the transmissions. She had been analyzing data from their recent planetary surveys and was disturbed by what she found. Several worlds near the border between human and former Federation space showed signs of environmental collapse and abandoned settlements. Helen explained that terraforming technology required constant adjustment and maintenance. Human engineers had designed systems that could adapt to planetary changes, but operating those systems required understanding the underlying principles. The alien technicians who inherited the equipment knew how to run standard procedures, but could not solve problems when conditions changed. Amy continued monitoring the distress signals and found more evidence of the Federation's collapse. The Viridian trading empire was reporting massive economic disruption as their computer systems failed without human programmers to maintain the complex algorithms that managed interstellar commerce. Billions of aliens faced food shortages as supply networks broke down. The Keth Collective had always prided themselves on being the Federation's technological leaders, but their latest transmission revealed a shocking truth. Keth scientists admitted they had not developed a single original innovation in over 200 years. All their advances had been modifications of human inventions that they no longer understood well enough to improve or repair. Jake found himself facing a difficult decision. Part of him felt satisfaction that the aliens were finally experiencing the consequences of their arrogance and exploitation. They had dismissed human contributions for centuries and treated humanity as nothing more than clever servants. Now they were learning what the galaxy was like without human innovation. But another part of Jake remembered his grandfather's stories about working alongside alien colleagues who had seemed genuinely friendly and respectful. Not every alien in the Federation had been aware of the systematic exploitation of humanity. Many had believed the propaganda about collaborative development and equal partnership. Pete Davis argued strongly for maintaining their isolation from Federation problems. He reminded Jake that the aliens had rejected every human attempt at negotiation and had even threatened military action to prevent the Exodus. Pete believed the Federation's collapse was proof that humanity had made the right choice in leaving. Dr. Helen Cruz presented a different perspective. Her analysis suggested that the Federation's breakdown could destabilize entire star systems and create massive refugee movements. Environmental collapses on terraformed worlds could affect nearby systems, and the failure of interstellar trade could trigger conflicts between desperate alien species. Amy reported that human space was not completely isolated from these problems. Several Outer Rim colonies had detected increased pirate activity as Federation security forces withdrew to protect core worlds. Refugee ships were beginning to appear at the edges of human territory carrying aliens who had fled failing worlds. The debate on the bridge reflected discussions happening throughout human space. Some colonies wanted to help their former alien neighbors, while others insisted that humanity should focus on building their own civilization without getting involved in Federation problems. A few extremist groups even suggested that alien suffering was justice for centuries of human exploitation. Jake realized that humanity faced its first major crisis since the Exodus. The question was not whether the Federation deserved help, but whether humanity could remain isolated from the chaos spreading across the galaxy. The aliens had created their own problems through arrogance and dependence, but the consequences were affecting everyone. As if summoned by their discussion, an alert sounded from Amy's station. Long-range sensors had detected a single ship approaching from Federation space. The vessel was broadcasting a diplomatic identification code and requesting permission to enter human territory. It was the first official alien contact since the Exodus 50 years ago. Jake stared at the sensor display showing the approaching ship. Whatever was aboard that vessel would determine whether humanity continued its isolation or became involved in the Federation's collapse. The decision he made in the next few hours would affect the future of both civilizations. The alien diplomatic vessel was unlike anything Jake Morrison had seen in 50 years. The ship looked ancient with hull plating that showed decades of repairs and modifications. It moved slowly toward human space, broadcasting the same message. Repeatedly requesting safe passage to meet with human leadership, Jake ordered the New Horizon to escort the alien ship to Freedom Point, the massive space station that served as humanity's new capital. The journey took 3 days, during which the alien vessel maintained complete communication silence except for basic navigation signals. Whatever message they carried was apparently too important to risk transmission over open channels. Freedom Point had been built in the years following the Exodus using purely human engineering and design principles. The station was a testament to what humanity could accomplish when working for themselves rather than alien masters. Its rotating sections provided artificial gravity while advanced manufacturing facilities produced everything human colonies needed to remain independent. President Maria Gonzalez waited in the main conference room along with her senior advisors. She had been elected to lead the Human Colonial Alliance 5 years earlier and was known for her careful, diplomatic approach to difficult problems. Maria understood that the decisions made in the coming days could determine whether humanity remained isolated or became involved in galactic affairs once again. The alien ship docked at Freedom Point's diplomatic bay and a single passenger disembarked. Ambassador Thalex of the Alterian Republic walked slowly down the boarding ramp, leaning heavily on a mechanical support device. The ambassador appeared much older than most Alterians Jake had encountered during his Federation service decades earlier. Thalex entered the conference room and looked around at the assembled human leaders with what appeared to be a mixture of desperation and hope. The ambassador's translator device converted his words into clear human language as he began to explain the purpose of his visit. The Federation was dying, and Thalex did not attempt to hide this fact from the humans. 17. Member species were experiencing critical failures in systems that had sustained their civilizations for centuries. Agricultural worlds could no longer feed their populations as crop diseases spread unchecked through genetically modified plants that human scientists were no longer available to adapt. Industrial production had collapsed on dozens of worlds as manufacturing systems broke down without human engineers to maintain the complex automated processes. The Corlin military was suffering devastating defeats against raiders who had learned that Federation forces could not adapt their tactics without human strategic advisors. But the worst crisis was affecting the core worlds where terraforming systems were failing catastrophically. Atmospheric processors on over 40 planets were breaking down as their control systems encountered conditions that alien technicians could not solve. Millions of aliens faced death as their artificial environments collapsed around them. Secretary of Defense Carl Johnson listened to the ambassador's report with obvious skepticism. He questioned whether the Federation's problems were really as severe as Thalex claimed, or if this was simply an attempt to manipulate human emotions. Carl had been a military officer during the Exodus and remembered how the aliens had threatened humanity to prevent their departure. Dr. Susan Lee, the chief science advisor, asked more technical questions about the specific failures Thalex described. Her analysis confirmed that the problems were real and consistent with what would happen if complex human-designed systems were operated by people who did not understand their underlying principles. Thalex revealed information that shocked even the most cynical human leaders. The Federation had maintained secret archives documenting every human contribution to galactic civilization. The records showed that humans had been responsible for 97% of all technological advances made by the Federation over the past 8 centuries. Even worse was the discovery that Federation species had deliberately suppressed innovation among their own populations. Alien children who showed creative thinking or problem-solving abilities were redirected into administrative roles, while those who followed instructions without question were promoted to technical positions. The Federation had systematically eliminated the traits that made civilizations capable of adapting to change. President Gonzalez asked the question that everyone was thinking. What exactly did the Federation want from humanity now? Thylex's answer revealed the true depth of alien desperation. Some Federation leaders wanted to negotiate for human technical assistance in exchange for resources and political concessions. Others demanded that humans return to Federation space immediately to prevent total civilizational collapse. The most extreme faction was developing weapons specifically designed to force human compliance. Intelligence reports suggested that several Federation species were building invasion fleets with the goal of capturing human colonies and forcing their populations to work as problem solvers for alien governments. Ambassador Thylex admitted that he represented only the moderate faction within the Federation government. Many of his colleagues still viewed humans as a resource to be managed rather than equals to be respected. The ambassador's own government had authorized him to offer humanity subordinate membership in a reformed Federation rather than the equal partnership that humans had originally demanded. The human leadership debated their response for hours, while Thylex waited patiently in diplomatic quarters. Some advisors argued for helping the Federation on humanitarian grounds, while others insisted that alien suffering was the inevitable result of their own arrogance and exploitation. Maria Gonzalez faced the most difficult decision of her presidency. She could authorize limited humanitarian assistance, which might prevent millions of alien deaths, but could also make humanity vulnerable to future exploitation. Alternatively, she could maintain complete isolation and let the Federation collapse entirely, which would eliminate the threat of alien interference but might destabilize the entire galaxy. The debate was interrupted when Intelligence Director Frank Carter arrived with urgent news. Long-range reconnaissance had detected massive fleet movements in Federation space. Multiple species were assembling their remaining military forces near the border with human territory. The formations were too large to be defensive and appeared to be preparing for coordinated offensive operations, Thylex confirmed Carter's worst fears when confronted with the intelligence reports. Hardline Federation leaders had decided that negotiation was pointless and were preparing to invade human space. They intended to capture human colonies and force the populations to solve Federation problems under military occupation. The ambassador begged President Gonzalez to authorize immediate talks with moderate Federation leaders who might still prevent the invasion. But Maria realized that time for diplomacy was running out. Humanity had left the Federation to escape exploitation, and now the aliens were preparing to take by force what they could not obtain through negotiation. Maria looked around the conference room at advisors who had dedicated their lives to building a free human civilization. The choice was no longer between isolation and involvement, but between surrender and resistance. The Federation had made their intentions clear, and humanity would have to defend everything they had built in the 50 years since this exodus. Admiral Kate Miller stood on the bridge of the human flagship Liberty, watching the Federation invasion fleet approach through the Centauri Gate. The massive alien armada contained ships from 12 different species, all working together in what they believed would be an easy victory over the scattered human colonies. Kate had fought alongside these same aliens during her Federation service decades ago and knew their strengths and weaknesses better than they realized. The Federation force outnumbered the human defenders by nearly 3-1, but Kate was not concerned about the odds. She had studied every battle plan and tactical manual the aliens used and understood that their military thinking had not evolved since the human exodus 50 years earlier. They were still following strategies created by human officers who were no longer there to adapt those plans when circumstances changed. Captain Ben Rodriguez commanded the defense station at Centauri Gate and was responsible for the first line of human resistance. His fortress was heavily armed but designed more for flexibility than raw firepower. Ben had spent months preparing unconventional defensive tactics that would exploit the Federation's inability to think creatively during combat. The alien fleet entered the Centauri system in perfect formation following a standard Federation assault pattern. The Corlin heavy cruisers led the attack while Zephyrian support vessels provided covering fire and Alterian troop transports waited in the rear for the inevitable human surrender. It was exactly the same approach they had used successfully for centuries when human tactical officers told them how to fight. Ben activated the first surprise as the Federation vanguard approached his station. Hidden asteroid bases throughout. The system powered up and began broadcasting false sensor readings that made the human defensive force appear much larger than it actually was. The alien commanders had no experience dealing with deception tactics and began spreading their formation to counter phantom threats that did not exist. Admiral Kate Miller watched the Federation response with satisfaction. The aliens were reacting exactly as their rigid training dictated when faced with superior numbers. They were dividing their force and losing the concentration of firepower that was their main advantage. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability over following predetermined plans, but the aliens had never learned to think that way. The real battle began when Federation ships reached the outer defensive perimeter. Ben Rodriguez had positioned his forces in what appeared to be a standard protective formation around the space station but was actually a carefully designed trap. As alien ships moved into attack positions, human vessels suddenly appeared from concealed positions. Behind asteroids and disabled ships, the Federation fleet found itself surrounded by human forces that should not have been there according to their intelligence reports. Corlin commanders desperately tried to follow their battle plans, but those plans assumed the enemy would behave in predictable ways. When human ships began using unconventional tactics, the alien officers could not adapt their responses quickly enough. Captain Ben Rodriguez demonstrated the difference between human and alien thinking during the crucial moments of the battle. When Federation reinforcements arrived from an unexpected direction, Ben immediately changed his entire defensive strategy to counter the new threat. The human crews adapted to his new orders within minutes, while alien forces would have needed hours to reorganize their predetermined formations. The most dramatic moment came when a Corlin battle group managed to break through the outer defenses and approached the space station directly. Ben ordered his crews to implement a defensive maneuver that no alien commander had ever seen before. The station itself became a weapon as hidden missile batteries fired coordinated salvos that created an impenetrable barrier around the facility. Admiral Kate Miller seized the opportunity created by Ben's innovative defense. She led the main human fleet in a flanking attack that struck the Federation force from behind while they were focused on the space station. The aliens had positioned their ships according to standard doctrine, which left them vulnerable to exactly this type of creative assault. But the real revelation came when human intelligence officer Lieutenant Claire Thompson accessed the Federation flagship's computer systems during the battle. What she discovered in their databases changed everything humanity thought they knew about alien civilization. The secret archives contained detailed records of how Federation society had been deliberately restructured over centuries to eliminate independent thinking. Claire found documents showing that alien leaders had recognized human creative potential early in their relationship and made a conscious decision to suppress similar traits in their own populations. They believed that specialization and efficiency were more important than adaptability and innovation. Over generations, they had created societies where following orders was valued more than solving problems. The Federation species were not naturally less intelligent or creative than humans. They had systematically bred those qualities out of their populations through social engineering and genetic selection. Alien children who showed curiosity or independent thinking were redirected into harmless activities, while those who demonstrated obedience and conformity were promoted to positions of authority. Dr. Nancy Wright had joined the battle fleet as humanity's lead xenopsychologist, and she analyzed Claire's discoveries with growing understanding. The aliens had created a civilization based on the assumption that innovation was dangerous and destabilizing. They preferred predictable solutions to creative ones and had trained their people to think that way for so many generations that they had lost the ability to adapt. This explained why Federation forces could not respond effectively to human tactics during the battle. Their officers had been trained to execute predetermined plans rather than think independently about battlefield conditions. When those plans failed, they had no backup strategy because developing new approaches required exactly the kind of creative thinking their society had eliminated. The battle at Centauri Gate ended with complete human victory, but Kate Miller took no satisfaction in defeating enemies who could not fight back effectively. The Federation fleet retreated in disorder, leaving behind damaged ships and thousands of casualties. More importantly, they left behind proof that their invasion had been motivated by desperation rather than strength. Ambassador Thylex contacted the human fleet from his ship near the battlefield. The moderate Alterian leader had remained in human space, hoping to prevent the conflict, but arrived too late to stop the invasion. Now he faced the task of convincing his government that military force could not solve the Federation's fundamental problems. Kate Miller realized that humanity faced a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could continue fighting and eventually destroy the Federation entirely, or they could find a way to help alien species relearn the innovative thinking their ancestors had possessed. The decision would require wisdom rather than military strength, and would test whether humans were truly better than the aliens who had exploited them. 6 months after the failed Federation invasion, President Maria Gonzalez stood before the Colonial Assembly on Freedom Point, addressing representatives from every human settlement in the Outer Rim territories. The Great Hall was filled with delegates who had traveled from dozens of worlds to decide humanity's response to the galactic crisis that continued to worsen each day. The Federation had completely fractured after their military defeat at Centauri Gate. Some species were desperately sending diplomatic missions to human space begging for technical assistance, while others had turned to raiding and piracy to steal human technology. A few alien governments had attempted to develop independence from human innovations but were struggling with problems their societies had never faced before. Maria presented the proposal that her administration had developed after months of careful consideration. Rather than rejoining the broken Federation or remaining completely isolated, humanity would establish an entirely new kind of relationship with willing alien species. The plan was called the Prometheus Accords, after the mythological figure who gave fire to humanity. The Accords would create the Innovation Exchange, a program where humans would teach problem-solving methods and creative thinking to alien species, but only to those willing to contribute equally to the partnership. Aliens could not simply request solutions to their problems, but would have to prove their commitment to learning how to solve problems themselves. Secretary of Defense Carl Johnson explained the military aspects of the proposal. Human space would be defended by joint patrols with alien species who demonstrated genuine reform of their societies. These partners would be required to train their officers using human tactical methods that emphasized adaptability over rigid planning. Any species that continued to view humans as resources rather than partners would be excluded from the alliance. Dr. Susan Lee outlined the scientific cooperation that would be central to the new relationship. Human researchers would work alongside alien scientists, but only on projects where both sides contributed original ideas and methods. The days of aliens simply implementing human-designed solutions without understanding the underlying principles were over forever. The debate in the Colonial Assembly reflected the divisions within human society about how to respond to the Federation's collapse. Representative Don Cooper from the mining colonies argued that humanity owed nothing to the aliens who had exploited them for centuries. He believed humans should focus entirely on building their own civilization without getting involved in alien problems. Representative Linda Garcia from the agricultural worlds presented the opposing view. She pointed out that complete isolation was impossible when refugee ships appeared regularly at human borders, carrying aliens fleeing environmental disasters on terraformed worlds. Linda argued that helping alien species become self-sufficient was the only way to ensure long-term stability for human colonies. The most passionate speech came from veteran Admiral Ryan Brooks, who had led the original exodus from Federation space. Ryan supported the Prometheus Accords, but warned that humanity must never again allow themselves to be taken advantage of by alien governments. Any cooperation must be based on mutual respect and equal contribution, or it would eventually lead to the same exploitation that caused the Exodus. After 3 days of debate, the Colonial Assembly voted to approve the Prometheus Accords by a narrow margin. President Gonzalez was authorized to begin negotiations with alien species who met the strict criteria for partnership. The first test would come with the Velen Republic, which had been attempting to solve their infrastructure problems, using methods learned from captured Federation databases. Commander Tony Baker led the first exchange mission to the Velen system aboard the diplomatic vessel New Dawn. His team included engineers, scientists, and military advisors who would evaluate whether the Velens were genuinely committed to independence, or were simply seeking another source of human solutions to their problems. The Velens had surprised everyone by making significant progress on their own. When their atmospheric processors began failing, they did not simply request human assistance, but instead studied the underlying engineering principles and developed their own modifications. The solutions were not as elegant as human designs, but they worked, and more importantly, the Velens understood how they worked. Tony Baker's mission confirmed that the Velens met the criteria for partnership. Their society had begun encouraging creative thinking among their young people, and their scientists were developing original research rather than simply copying human methods. The Velen government agreed to the exchange program and became the first alien species to join the new alliance. Captain Julia Davis commanded the second exchange mission to the reformed Zephyrian colonies. The agricultural specialist she brought with her found a remarkable transformation in Zephyrian farming methods. Instead of relying entirely on human genetic modifications, the aliens had begun developing their own crop varieties adapted to local conditions. The Zephyrian scientists were learning to understand plant genetics, rather than just following human procedures. They made mistakes, and their early experiments sometimes failed, but they were thinking independently about agricultural problems. Julia reported that the Zephyrians were ready for partnership and recommended accepting them into the innovation exchange. Other alien species made different choices about their future. The Corlin military refused to abandon their rigid command structure and continued launching raids against human shipping. The Alterian Republic split into factions, with some groups embracing reform while others demanded a return to the old Federation system with humans in subordinate roles. The new Galactic Cooperative was formally established 2 years after the Prometheus Accords, with 7 alien species joining humanity as equal partners. The alliance was based on mutual contribution rather than dependence, and each member species was required to maintain their commitment to independent innovation and creative problem-solving. Jake Morrison, who had first detected the Federation distress signals, was promoted to Admiral and given command of the first joint exploration mission into uncharted space. His crew included humans and aliens working together as true partners rather than masters and servants. The mission represented a new era where different species contributed their unique strengths to face unknown challenges. The final ceremony took place on Earth in the city of New Geneva, where the Galactic Cooperative established its headquarters. President Maria Gonzalez stood with alien partners watching the sunrise over a building where human and alien scientists worked side by side, developing solutions to problems that no single species could solve alone. The galaxy was no longer divided between those who thought and those who ruled, but had become a community where innovation and creativity were valued regardless of which species contributed them. Humanity had not only escaped exploitation, but had shown other species how to reclaim the independence and dignity that their ancestors had possessed before the Federation taught them to stop thinking for themselves.